At the pinnacle of the bridge stands a half-naked man. This is the most famous illusionist in history, Harry Houdini. During this trick, he must jump from the bridge while handcuffed. The death of Harry Houdini remains shrouded in mystery. His life, perhaps, is an even greater enigma. 100 years ago, Houdini's shows attracted tens of thousands of people, and not only in America, England, Australia, Germany. He was locked in a water tank, hung at great heights in a straitjacket. He jumped from a bridge in handcuffs. He deceived not only death, he deceived everyone, and very successfully. After all, there was no Harry Houdini. There was only a young man from a poor immigrant family, without money, education, or connections. In just a few years, he became someone the whole world recognized. Houdini invented hype before the internet. Houdini invented challenges before YouTube. Houdini became synonymous with the word magic. His life was vibrant. His mysterious death was unexpected. Numerous theories and rumors emerged. What could be true among them and what couldn't, we will certainly discuss. This story is not only about the most famous magician, Harry Houdini. This is a story of grand deception which continues to work to this day. The 20th century was rich in mysteries and mysticism. However, there is a top list of 5 to 10 enigmas that the internet discusses most often, offering ever new theories, each more striking than the last. The mystery of Harry Houdini's demise undoubtedly ranks in this top list. First, the strange death of one of the most famous people, not only in the country, but in the world in the mid-1920s, raises questions. Second, Harry Houdini was an illusionist. He performed dangerous tricks hundreds of times, each time surviving, and suddenly he dies for no apparent reason in the prime of life. Strange. Third, by the time of his death, Harry Houdini was a leading fighter against a major mafia group. For its members, he was a thorn in the side, a blight on the eye, and spoke in the wheels all at once. Finally, almost everyone has heard the name Harry Houdini. However, few know the true scale of his figure. Here's a small example. The year 1903. Harry Houdini arrives in the Russian Empire. He is greeted as a superstar despite being virtually unknown 5 years prior, even in his homeland of America. Houdini approaches one of the high-ranking police officials with an interesting idea. He proposes to be handcuffed and placed in a prison cart. If Houdini cannot escape, the cart will go straight to Siberia with him. The policeman accepts the challenge. The half-naked Houdini is thoroughly searched, handcuffed, put in the cart, and they wait. After 27 minutes, he emerges to the astonishment of the assembled crowd. How he pulled it off, no one understood then, much like most of his tricks. However, not all mysteries withstand the test of time. For a long time, Houdini's diaries were considered lost. Then they were found, but another problem arose. Half of what was written by the magician himself turned out to be lies. The life of our hero began in mystery. In his diary, Harry Houdini wrote that he was born in April 1874 in the city of Appleton, in the central part of the United States. Almost none of this was true, but you'll agree, only a true master could manage to lie 3 times in a single sentence. By the time of the boy's birth, his last name was not Houdini. He was born far outside the United States and finally not in April. Why Harry distorted facts even in his personal diary, you will understand later. The real circumstances of Houdini's life were established only many years after his death, and here is how it was in reality. The year 1874. A boy is born in Budapest, Hungary. His name is Erich Weiss. At the age of 4, he moves with his family to America, to the small town of Appleton in the central part of the country. There was a large Jewish community, but no rabbi. The future illusionist's father, Meyer Samuel Weiss, was invited to fill the vacant position. Later, this version of events would seem dull to Harry Houdini, and he would claim otherwise. Allegedly, his father killed an important member of the royal family in Hungary in a duel and was forced to flee. The story, of course, is a fabrication, but it sounds beautiful. One of the major events in Houdini's life occurs at the age of 8. His father loses his job as a rabbi. The family, which at that time had 7 children, moves to a neighboring city. The following few years, they live in great poverty. This period will leave a lasting impression on the future superstar. It will deeply influence Houdini's personality. In his diary, he will almost erase all mentions of the 5 years spent in the provincial town of Milwaukee. One of the few memories from those years is attending a show by the famous illusionist Dr. Lin. His most well-known trick was dismembering parts of his assistant's body before the astonished eyes of the audience. For the 10-year-old Houdini, the trick made a huge impression. Today, the audience would likely notice the strategically placed stage lighting, the cleverly suspended curtain, and other tricks. But in the 19th century, spectators perceived Dr. Lin's show as a miracle. A poor childhood and a love for performances are the two things that not only influenced Eric Weiss, but essentially transformed him into Harry Houdini. When the future illusionist turns 14, his father moves the family to New York. Every person on the planet, when first arriving in New York, experienced the very feelings that young Eric Weiss did at the end of the 19th century. Streets surrounded by gigantic buildings, crowds of people, and bright lights make one believe that anything and even a little more is possible. Upon arriving in New York, Houdini begins to work. His unfinished school education would remain his only formal education. The lack of knowledge would undoubtedly haunt our hero almost until the end of his life. However, young Eric Weiss likely had few alternative options. The family still lived quite poorly. At the same time, the teenager becomes passionate about sports. It is not so much any specific discipline, but rather the competitive aspect that captivates him. He engages in boxing, he engages in running. One of the main attractions of sports for the young Houdini was the opportunity to be first. There is an adolescent photograph of our hero in sports attire, adorned with a multitude of medals on his chest. Some of these awards are genuine, while others are fake. Harry Houdini, then still Eric Weiss, crafted himself medals from milk bottle caps. Older spectators may recall glass milk and kefir bottles with flexible metal caps. Houdini used such items to enhance his significance. The fact of the fake medals speaks volumes. Eric Weiss, who arrived in New York, longed to win more frequently and earn more, thereby distinguishing himself from the crowd of immigrants. In short, he wanted to belong to something greater than himself. Around that time, the 15-year-old Eric Weiss came across a memoir by the famous illusionist Robert Houdin, a name that says little to the general public, yet is legendary. Now is the time to briefly discuss the history of magic. Tricks have a long heritage. Even in ancient Egypt and Rome, markets featured tricks with cups and balls where stones played the ball's role. Gradually, illusionists and magicians acquired a sinister reputation, being equated with witches and sorcerers. It was not until the 17th and 18th centuries that this ill repute faded, and illusionists became an essential part of fairground entertainment. Perhaps they would have continued so had it not been for the mentioned earlier Frenchman Robert Houdin. In the 19th century, he transformed street shows for the poor into grand theatrical performances for the affluent. To clarify, these were no longer mere cups and balls. For instance, Robert was the first to make a person levitate. To this day, Houdin is considered the father of modern stage magic. In 1889, 15-year-old Eric Weiss regarded Robert Houdin's book as a guide to action. He decides to become an illusionist seriously. The first thing he does is change his name. A friend of Eric's suggests he take Houdin's surname as a basis and alter it slightly. Thus, Eric Weiss becomes Harry Houdini. This transition becomes more than just a stage pseudonym. From this moment, Harry Houdini disregards his Hungarian origins and tells everyone that he is American. In 1891, 17-year-old Houdini begins his ascent to the Olympus. For a teenager from a poor family with neither education nor connections, show business was almost the only option to achieve something remarkable. In this regard, the situation has changed little over the past century. Continuing to work in a necktie factory, he participates in so-called dime shows. A dime is a 10-cent coin, the price paid by spectators to attend a peculiar entertainment fair. Instead of pavilions, artists of various genres stand. Strongmen, trainers, fire-tamers, and of course magicians. Spectators come, watch. If they are interested, they stay. If not, they move on. The dime show of that time was a kind of gateway to show business and simultaneously a boot camp for a novice performer. Performing the same tricks 10 times a day for several years is an ideal practice for a young artist. Over the course of several years, Harry Houdini's career was just beginning to gain momentum. At this point, his father passes away. Houdini promises to take care of his mother and family. He will fulfill this promise, but not immediately. Harry continues to perform at the Dime Show. It is there, among the performers, that he meets a girl assistant named Bess. She becomes his wife. Their joint act is now called Houdini, in the plural. By the year 1898, the career of 24-year-old Houdini seems to be at a standstill, if not sliding backward. He still does not step beyond fairground performances. Harry and his wife move in with his mother. It is hard to believe, but he will become the most famous illusionist in America just 1 year later. In 1899, Harry Houdini invents the handcuff escape. It sounds impressive, but not enough to make the newspapers. However, an escape from handcuffs at a police station is another matter. The incident is immediately published in the newspapers. Houdini begins to travel with performances across American cities. In his shows, he presents a standard program that does not differ much from the average illusionist of that time. Arriving in a new city, Houdini first goes to the police station before his performance, executes his handcuff escape trick, and gets into the local newspapers. Houdini becomes not just the first illusionist, but also the first artist in history to masterfully manipulate the press. At the turn of the century, Houdini's media popularity is noticed by producers. Influential impresario Martin Beck not only invites Harry to perform in his show at the best venues in the country, but also makes the main contribution to the career of the future star. Beck advises Houdini to abandon standard tricks and focus solely on escapes and releases. By the early 20th century, Houdini has earned a reputation as a master of escape. He tours not only in American cities, but also in Europe and Russia. Everywhere he executes an escape from the police station and bases his entire show program around escapology. In the late 19th century, there were not many types of handcuffs and locks. Houdini collected all kinds of key variations, and often that was the secret. The main question remained where to hide them. Often Harry performed his tricks almost naked and even allowed himself to be searched before the start of the performance. To hide the keys, Houdini had a prosthetic on his thumb, imitating a real one, or a prosthetic on his foot, or a key in his mouth, and most likely both. Besides actual keys, there were cunning devices that the illusionist invented himself. They came into play if the appropriate key could not be found. Additionally, during his studies, Harry discovered that some types of handcuffs could be opened without a key at all. It was enough to simply tap in the right place on a hard surface. Upon arriving in a new city, he always inspected the venue for the trick and the handcuffs. Depending on this, the strategy for the future escape was decided. In the early 20th century, Houdini devised one of his most famous tricks, the escape from a milk can. A standard milk transport can was used. Before the trick, the illusionist asked several volunteers from the audience to closely examine the can for hidden secrets. Once everything was checked, the can was filled to the brim with water, and Houdini would enter it in handcuffs. After this, the lid of the can was locked. The audience held their breath in anticipation. The illusionist didn't have much time to escape, only as long as he could hold his breath. After a minute, Harry Houdini would be seen standing next to the can, alive, unharmed, and free of handcuffs. The can itself remained completely untouched. The secret was as follows. The upper part of the can was attached with rivets. To the spectators who inspected it before the trick, the rivets seemed secure. However, from the inside, the rivets could be unlocked. The top part of the can would detach, Houdini would escape, and then place the top part back onto the can. At the moment when Houdini emerged from the can, either the lighting dimmed in the hall or a cloth was lowered. But everything happened so quickly that the naive spectator assumed that Houdini had performed a miracle. He was standing next to the still locked can. A little later, Houdini's performances would become more grand, even reaching the point of making an entire elephant disappear. But for now, in the early 20th century, the milk can escape and escapes from police stations were enough for him to be talked about across several continents. Houdini was applauded not only in America, but also in almost all of Europe. he became very famous and very wealthy. At this moment, it seemed that Harry Houdini had achieved everything that the teenager Eric Weiss could ever dream of. The main sign of any success is the presence of imitators. While Houdini toured Europe for several years, many of his doubles appeared in America. People didn't just take the ideas of his tricks, but also fully adopted his persona right down to the names. Particularly bold individuals called themselves Houdini, while the slightly more astute only made minor changes to the pseudonym. In 1905, Harry returned to the United States. He intended to fight against the imitators. A particularly striking episode was the plan to combat a woman with the pseudonym Minerva. She also worked in the escape genre. Her rise was doubly dangerous for Houdini. His image was built on physical strength and endurance. What would the audience think if even a woman could replicate his tricks? Harry devised a cunning plan to promote another female illusionist. In his view, she would divert attention from Minerva while being completely under his control. Whether Houdini succeeded in carrying out his cunning plan is unknown, but what is known for sure is that in the fight for the title of the world's greatest illusionist, he was ready to go to any lengths. A true success for Houdini was not only his own triumph, but also the failure of his competitors. Another incident speaks to the darker sides of the illusionist's personality. After a person achieves fame and wealth, they often try to move to the next stage, gaining respect. Houdini does the same. He sets out to write the history of magic. There is no doubt that for an uneducated individual, writing an encyclopedia is a quite understandable step from a psychological perspective. To prepare the book, he contacts the relatives of Robert Houdin, the very father of magic, who inspired his fascination with tricks. The family declines his request. This affronts Houdini so much that he turns the book into a virtual exposé of his mentor. Houdini's history of magic, despite all his media clout, fails. This moment coincides with other problems in the illusionist's career. Gradually, the public begins to tire of the monotonous escapes. Ticket sales for his performances fall. It even reaches a point where his face doesn't feature on the posters in some cities. Houdini realizes he needs a new idea. At the end of the year 1908, Harry Houdini jumps from a bridge. Thousands of spectators gather for the event. The illusionist dons handcuffs, prepares and jumps. Moments later, Houdini emerges free on the water's surface. The crowd is thrilled. Houdini once again catches a wave of interest, banking on the idea that life's risk would capture attention. In that moment, Harry realizes one important thing. To remain a star illusionist, one needs to risk their life. Following the success of the first jump, Harry repeats them over and over. If there is a bridge and a sufficiently deep river in a city, Houdini is there. He performs this trick for several years. However, this time the performance appears dangerous, not only to the spectators, but also is actually dangerous. Unlike well-prepared and thought-out indoor performances, here much can go awry. One might land poorly or strike something underwater, and whereas previously the maximum price for a failed trick was public humiliation, now it was his own life. Houdini indeed gets injured several times, but not severely enough to stop performing the tricks. For Harry, obscurity is worse than death. This is confirmed by the following episode, the year 1910. Harry Houdini heads to Australia. His next performance becomes flying an airplane. In the early 20th century, aviation was a true marvel. Pilots were real superheroes and the chances of crashing were very high. Houdini goes to Australia for one simple reason. By 1910, no airplane flight had been conducted on the continent. Houdini intends to change that, hoping to make front-page news as Australia's first pilot. He buys a plane, learns to take off and land. It doesn't always go smoothly, and some of his flights end in injuries. Another issue is that sailing from the States to Australia is quite a long distance. During this time, Houdini has several competitors emerging. Eventually, he reaches Australia and performs a flight. Harry does not become the first pilot on the continent, but he is among the top 3, honestly earns his headlines in the press, and returns to America with a feeling of an incomplete duty. By the year 1916, Houdini is once again searching. In show business, one must constantly remind the public of one's presence. In the subsequent years, Harry would carry out the most grandiose performances of his life. The first, an escape from a straitjacket at a height. The essence of the trick is simple. Houdini is put in a straitjacket and suspended upside down at the height of a few floors. In literally half a minute, he completely frees himself. The secret of the trick was in the construction of the jacket and the correct positioning of the arms. This way, Houdini managed to slightly wiggle the material, free one arm, then the other, and finally unlock the locks. This had an indescribable effect on the gathered audience. The next popular trick became the so-called Chinese water torture cell. Handcuffed, Houdini is placed upside down in a large water tank. The complexity was that not only his hands but also his feet were shackled. The top part was secured with locks. Afterward, the Chinese cell was covered with a curtain. In less than a minute, the curtain lifted, and Houdini stood free next to the cell. At the time, no one understood how the illusionist managed to pull it off. The trick was impressive and perceived as pure magic. The secret was, of course, later revealed. When the assistant closed the top lid of the cell, they discreetly removed a pin from a hinge. Thanks to this, Houdini could first free himself from the handcuffs, then easily open the top lid so that the locks remained untouched and get out. As additional assurance during this trick, an assistant stood backstage with a huge axe. Finally, Houdini's most grandiose trick, the vanishing of an elephant. The mystery of this performance is further enhanced by the fact that it happened only once, and no photographs or video recordings have survived. The year 1918, one of the New York theaters, there are reportedly several hundred to several thousand people present at the performance. Houdini leads an elephant into a large box on stage and, in a few moments, it disappears. How Houdini managed this remains unknown to this day. Many theories have been proposed. Some claimed that the secret lay in the mirrors placed inside the box. Others insisted that the cause was in the lighting, making part of the box invisible. This trick remained one of the most mysterious and thrilling and stands as the pinnacle of Houdini's career as an illusionist. In the mid-1920s, several obstacles arose that threatened Harry Houdini's professional life. The first reason was personal. By that time, his mother had died. For Houdini, she was the closest person, and it was her he promised to take care of when his father passed away. The second reason is age. In 1924, Houdini was 50 years old. His stunts heavily relied on physical endurance. For objective reasons, performing them became difficult. The third reason is technology. The cinema posed a significant threat to his career. There, the audience saw much more spectacular tricks than they could witness in real life. Houdini attempted to enter this powerful new industry, but the films featuring him failed. His tricks on the screen no longer attracted the audience. Then Houdini decided to act in other ways. He intended to expose charlatans. At that time, the most famous were the spiritualists. These are people who gather in a room, summon spirits, and converse with them. The conflict with the spiritualists, of course, would address the issue of Harry Houdini's waning career, but at the same time, it might cost him his life. Spiritualism in the early 20th century was a fashionable phenomenon. After the end of the First World War, its popularity increased even more. Millions died, whose relatives eagerly believed they could connect with their loved ones in this manner. At the center of the performance was a medium. He or she received signals from the spirit of the deceased. Spiritualism was a mixture of religion, charlatanism, and organized crime. The seances were not free, which made them utterly immoral. Harry Houdini decided to go on a crusade against the spiritualists, not because he was a hardened skeptic. Moreover, after his mother's death, he likely attended these seances himself. But the eye of an experienced illusionist immediately recognized all the tricks and stratagems of the so-called mediums. Interest in the upcoming conflict was intensified by the following fact. Arthur Conan Doyle was a close acquaintance of Harry. Arthur Conan Doyle believed in spirits. Moreover, he was one of the most prominent proponents of spiritualism in the world. Their conflict with Houdini developed gradually. At first, Arthur tried to convince the illusionist of the reality of spiritual seances. Arthur acknowledged the existence of frauds, but claimed there were real mediums, for example, his wife. Houdini agreed to a spiritual séance. In 1922, he intended to communicate with his deceased mother. The séance's plot unfolded as follows. The wife of Arthur, in Houdini's presence, connected with the spirit of his mother, and supposedly she began moving the medium's hand, writing what the deceased wanted to say. Despite all of Harry's love for his mother, he immediately realized it was a lie. He promised to expose all spiritualists. A media war began. It flared up even more when Houdini collaborated with a scientific magazine in America. It announced a reward of $2,500 to any medium who could conduct a real spiritual séance. The challenge was taken up by Mina Crandon, at that time one of the most famous female spiritualists in America. Allegedly, people at her séances flew, and she herself was practically naked during them, which supposedly proved she was hiding no secrets. During the Crandon séance, attended by Houdini, he successfully exposes her, and it becomes a very sensational story in the newspapers. At that moment, it becomes clear that for Houdini's popularity, he no longer needs to dive into icy water and constantly put himself in danger. He begins to engage in exposing spiritualists on a regular basis. Houdini disguises himself so he is not recognized, attends a séance, and in the middle of it jumps up, discards his disguise and shouts that everyone is unmasked. And it all seems quite amusing if not for the death threats that start coming in for Houdini. Spiritualists were essentially a large mafia organization. The activities of the former illusionist began to deprive them of a significant share of their profits. On October 31st, 1926, Houdini unexpectedly died. The sudden death of one of the country's most popular figures at 52 years old immediately raises questions. Were spiritualists involved? Gradually, details come to light. 2 days prior, Houdini had a performance in Montreal. Before that, 3 students entered his dressing room. There is nothing unusual about this fact. The illusionist often interacted with spectators and fans. During the conversation, one of the interlocutors asked whether Houdini could withstand a punch to the stomach. At that moment, the student delivered a strong blow to him. Other interlocutors would later claim that at the moment of the punch, Houdini was half reclining on the couch and didn't have time to brace himself. The punch did happen, but how strong it was remains unknown, as does whether the visiting students were somehow connected to the spiritualists. What is known for sure is that Houdini conducted a show that evening. Despite feeling unwell over the next 2 days, he delayed seeking medical attention as long as possible. Eventually, Houdini was taken to the hospital where he was diagnosed with peritonitis and underwent emergency surgery. It turned out that Houdini had appendicitis, which had become inflamed. Most likely, the punch to the stomach 2 days earlier had nothing to do with it. Either way, the doctors were powerless, and Houdini died. When his casket was carried out onto the streets of New York, crowds gathered to pay their respect. Some of them were convinced that this was yet another performance, and that Houdini would miraculously rise from the dead. Harry had cheated death many times. It might first seem that death ultimately proved more cunning, but Houdini, as a true master of performances, executed an unexpected twist. He, in essence, became immortal. To this day, he remains the most famous illusionist in history. For many years after his death, his wife, Bess Houdini, attended séances in hopes of contacting her husband. Harry, having fought against charlatans for so many years, still held out hope that one of them might be genuine. The couple had devised a special code before his death. If a spiritualist could reproduce it, Bess would know that it was really her husband speaking. However, a genuine spiritualist was never found.